Hi everyone, and welcome back to our Phillip Capital podcast for the week. So thank you for all of you to tune in live with us on another episode of our podcast. So I will be your host for today, and my name is Yongshen. So with me here today will be David, who is a full-time proprietary trader with IcebergX Sdn Bhd. So how are you, David, today?
Yeah, I'm good.
Great, good to hear that. So for today's podcast, we will be discussing on the topic, discover golden opportunities in the gold and the silver market. Okay, so to our audiences out there who are currently investing in gold or silver, or do you have any other interest in investing in gold, do not miss out this podcast. So this podcast will be a preview about the upcoming webinar, which will hold on July 13th. If you are interested to join on the webinar, please register and you will be able to join in. So once again, I would like to help all of our beloved audience today to share this video to all of your friends. So the more people that are watching this video, the more we are motivated to deliver greater content to all of you. And without further ado, let's jump into our topic for today. So David, can you share with us more about to the audience what they need to know and how to gain more opportunities in the gold market?
Firstly, just like to thank Phillip Capital for inviting me on this platform. I think the topic, is indeed a very interesting one. Discover golden opportunities, especially in the gold and silver market. So probably you have known that over the past, this year has been quite a tumultuous year. We have Ukraine crisis, and whatnot, and it's really affecting commodities market in general. And we see a lot of traction, especially in the metal space. So obviously, if you probably have recalled back in early March 2020, we saw the peak in pretty much the gold prices because that was the outbreak of the COVID crisis. But since then, I think pretty much the precious metal has probably lost some ground. And I think this year itself is finding very difficult to really gain those ground back. So in my upcoming webinar, which I'm going to be touching on, I'll be mainly talking about what are the key fundamentals that we should be looking at, and some other areas that worth to pay close attention to, especially you are trading the metal space. So in this preview, probably I'm just going to share a little bit snapshot of some of the things that I'll be probably mentioning in the webinar. Of course, I'll leave the best part for the webinar. So hopefully the audience will get to tune in on that day. So as usual, I think whenever we are dealing with derivative, it does involve risk. So make sure you do consult your licensed representative before you start trading in the futures market. So anyway, the webinar is purely for educational purpose, and my opinions are purely my personal. It doesn't reflect opinions from Phillip Capital or even in fact from the exchange. So these are some of the key things that we're going to be covering. I think when it comes to gold market, it's important for us to dissect some of the key fundamentals that's actually happening, especially when you talk about when you trade gold, it's very balanced market. The demand and supply is actually quite fixed. You look at supply of gold, you don't see that kind of much incremental as compared to other commodities. But what's really interesting is that the price of gold over historical period, it has shown quite a resilience when it comes to tough economic situations. But this time around, we start to see a slightly different scenario. So we try to uncover what is actually happening. And if you just look at some of the key fundamental dynamics in gold market, you can clearly see some fundamentals are actually not showing you a good sign when it comes to the gold market. So I'm a big fan of using seasonality. So when you trade commodities, there's always seasons where you should be holding long and where seasons that you should be thinking of shorting a position because the market is actually generally very weak during that period. So same goes for gold market. I think there is a couple of pocket of opportunities, which periods where they tend to trade on a stronger basis and they tend to trade on a weaker basis. I also will be sharing just a very small touch on simple trade setups whenever you trade the gold market, which you can use. So I'll probably leave much of the explanation in the webinar. But what I want to cover is that really I think the global economy, whether you can call it, it's all matter of opinions. But pretty much I think global economy is not looking too well. And I think in question, therefore, will people rush to gold as a safe haven? But I think clearly, as global economy is not going on the right foot track, I think there is definitely the need for people to diversify their asset classes, and gold should be considered as part of it. So these are all showing you indication of risk of recession. So I'm not going to go too much in detail in this podcast. But what's important, I think in that webinar, we will be covering, some of the key aspects or key indicators that the audience or investors should look out for, especially when they try to find telltale signs of a weakness in the economy. So I think right now, recession, used to be a buzzword. I think that's no longer the case. I think everyone is really looking at, whether in fact recession is pretty much an old theme. Right now, pretty much the general public is thinking, are we heading into stagflation, which is a much more serious issue if you look to comprehend. So I think that's we'll uncover more of that during the webinar. So really, I mean, what's lingering on people's mind is, is really gold still play the role of a safe haven asset. Now, if you look at the past performance, you compare it with, the infamous Dow Jones Index against the gold commodity price, you can clearly see there used to be an inverse relationship that is happening. But recently, that relationship seems to be broken, and in fact, both the asset classes are moving parallel. That means, whenever Dow Jones is weak, you probably will see gold prices to be weak as well. We have not seen that in history, for quite a long time. Of course, there will be seasons, there will be periods where both asset classes will move quite parallel, but this time now it's quite persistent. So I think there is a lot to uncover with this phenomenon, and it's worth to pay close attention to, especially if you're trading the gold market. So these are some of the key fundamentals which I'm probably going to dissect more, especially during the webinar. And really going deep down into some of the key demand areas, because really ultimately what is pushing commodity price is demand and supply. If you have a commodity that is short in supply and you have high demand, and that's going to be strong for prices. But vice versa, so in terms of gold market, we probably generally will see stronger prices because demand is always there. This is a matter of how great or how high of a demand is going to be. And China and India is always the largest economy in terms of gold demand. So we're going to uncover what are their prospects like going forward, especially when it comes to gold market. So I think if you look at it, this is interesting. If you compare S&P 500 against gold prices for a period of time, you notice that just recently, as I was just mentioning in the previous chart, where gold tend to move quite parallel with Dow Jones prices. So whenever investors are running away from equity, they are not going into the gold market. That's for sure. So I think that's something to watch out for. If this continue to persist, I think it's telling something about the role of gold as a safe haven asset. Now, I mean, I'll talk a little bit more about weeks, about a fear indicator, about the general sentiment of the market in the webinar. But just to give you a slight indication, a slight picture, I think generally the market, despite we are seeing equities market to correct or Federal Reserve thinking to hike quite aggressively, the fear in the market is still quite complacent for now. So obviously, I think as an investor or as a trader, you have to watch out weeks, which is known as a fear indicator. So as long as this indicator don't start to rise too rapidly, we don't see the kind of fear that we see back in the start of COVID. So I will discuss more during the webinar on why we should pay close attention to wicks and other related indicators. Now, since we are on the topic of gold, it's also worth mentioning silver is also another precious metal space. So whenever we talk about gold, they tend to discount silver. So if you recall, I think back in late 2020, we saw there's a huge buying frenzy in the silver market. I think it pushed up silver prices to as high as about 35 to 40 US dollar. I think that's quite tremendous. Then since then, it actually corrected. So that ratio, the gold silver ratio, normally it runs about 65 to 80 as a ratio, even to as high as 112. When you have a high ratio like this, that tells you silver market is way undervalued. And normally, if you're someone that you believe in mean reversion, normally you trade this type of ratios. So again, I think it gives a clear indication that gold market is still robust. But if you compare to silver market, it seems like silver market still seems to be the underperformer. So with that, I'm just going to give you a very brief snapshot of what I'm going to cover. So I think obviously with that, with all this in mind, it's important also for us to navigate the market through certain technical strategies that is quite useful for the audience. So which I'm going to share quite in detail in the upcoming webinar. So with that, I'm just going to hand over to Yongxian, I think, for this podcast session.
Okay, great. Yeah, I hope I also can learn more on your upcoming webinar. So thank you for sharing, and I hope that it will help the new investors out there. And to all our audience who are very interested to invest in gold. So we are currently having a year-long promotion of CNE Micro Gold. So all of our clients are able to enjoy a super low brokerage rate at only USD3 per lot. So for more details, you can drop us a message on Facebook and our representative will get back to you. So, and now we have come to an end for our today's podcast. If you have any question or any topics you want to discuss with us next week, you can message us in the comment box below. So thank you for listening to our podcast and happy trading for the week. So thank you for your time too, Mr. David. Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.